This is a 1960 Mercedes-Benz 190B that's been left to rot in a garage since 1972. Yeah, you heard that right. Someone bought this icon back when it was one of the best cars on the planet, and somehow thought the best way to honor it was to let it rack up dust and deteriorate for over 5 decades. They probably had their reason, but whatever it was, it really doesn't matter now because this beauty is just about hanging on for its dear life. It looked like it might be on its way to the scrapyard until Wyatt and Lance Bush showed up. In case you're wondering, those two are a father and son tag team who specialize in restoring rusted relics. They bought this car for $1,650 during an online auction. And now they've driven all the way to Longview in East Texas to pick it up and drag it to their garage in North Texas, where they will attempt to restore it. Can they pull it off? Hauling a car is never an easy job, especially when the brake calipers are stuck. But honestly, given the years of damage and neglect this poor Mercedes has suffered, that painfully stubborn toe might actually be the easiest part of this entire restoration. Right off the bat, Wyatt and Lance sensed trouble. One of the hinges was bent, and the hood itself had suffered slight structural damage. But once they took the whole thing off, they found even more serious damage. The interior isn't any better, though. It has a ripped headliner, stained door panels, and seats that look like they've hosted one too many garage lunches. To be fair, this Mercedes 190B still has a shot at redemption. But with so many missing and broken parts, you really cannot help but wonder if it will ever run again. I guess there's only one way to find out. Before jumping into anything serious, Wyatt and Lance scoured the internet to purchase as many essential engine parts as they could find, including timing chains, gears, an oil filter, and a chain guide. They also grabbed this auto repair that was found in the car because at the end of the day, when you're repairing a car as badly damaged as this one, every scrap of wisdom counts. With all of that now sorted, it's time for these guys to get their hands dirty. Once the seal came off, Wyatt and Lance quickly replaced the crankshaft gear, and then they dove right back into the disassembly process. Next, they flipped the script for some quick-fire installations. With all that done, it's time to fire up this engine for the first time in over 5 decades. After 3 attempts, the engine refused to start, but Wyatt and Lance aren't about to give up. They gave it a few minutes to breathe, and then they had another go at it. Now, that's a real problem, because without a functional engine, this Mercedes 190B, even when fully restored, will be nothing but a box of metal clamped together. Sure, they could toss in a modern replacement, but that'd cost cash, time, and worst of all, authenticity. For emphasis, the goal of this restoration is to reverse the years of damage and neglect this car has suffered while keeping most of its original parts intact. In other words, the thought of replacing the engine was totally off the table. Wyatt and Lance didn't even want to imagine that happening, so they rolled up their imaginary sleeve and got down to work. Now it's time for another attempt, but instead of doing the jump start routine again, they decided to use the key. Unfortunately, the outcome wasn't any better. The engine didn't even cough, which means more work for the restorers. Once that brief restorative work was completed, it was time for another test.
Here we go.
Yet another failed start. But instead of losing steam, it fired them up even more. These guys weren't backing down. Not now, not never. At this point, it looked like the engine was irredeemable, but Wyatt and Lance decided to try one last time. They injected fuel into the carburetor and cleaned up a few things, and then it was time to crank it up again. Still the same result, but these restorers refused to back down. They set out to fix a few parts they thought might be causing the issue. Once those were in place, they set out for another engine test. There was a bit of a scare there with the fire flash, but that's encouraging compared to the previous attempts. Wyatt and Lance still weren't satisfied though, so they gave it another shot. After multiple repair attempts and a mini overhaul, the engine is finally up and running. It's a huge relief for the restorers and for everyone else rooting for this 1960 Mercedes 190B to hit the road again. And it's all thanks to Wyatt and Lance. It's always nice to see a father and son duo working on projects like this, but these guys absolutely took it to another level. They outdid themselves. But let's not pop the champagne just yet, because this car is still a few installations and crisp paint job away from becoming renewed. Next, they replaced the radiator and fan belt. There was also time to put fresh gas and coolant into the car. Then, they moved over to the rear, clearing up the electrical junk that the previous owner had left behind and replacing it with a gallon of fuel. Sounds like a good idea because when this beast is finally running, Wyatt and Lance will have so much fun driving it that they may probably forget to visit the gas station. But before they could dream of doing burnouts or even basic turns with this thing, they needed to fix the brake calipers. Once that was completed, they fired up the engine again, because why not? That was awesome. But apparently the restorers had one more surprise for us. At the beginning of this video, this 1960 Mercedes 190B had no atom of life in it. But thanks to the expertise and resilience of these restorers, it's almost ready to roll again. The engine has been fully restored, and so are the lights. All that's left now is to mend the few dents on the hood, some much-needed interior attention, and a final polish to bring out that vintage shine. And that's exactly what Wyatt and Lance set out to do, starting with the hood. With the hood now secured and sitting pretty, it was time to give this 1960 Mercedes 190B a much-needed scrub. In transporting it to the car wash, they ended up giving this icon its first test drive since it was restored, and it was smooth. One can only imagine how well it would look and ride when it's all done. The result was decent, but it's far from perfect. Many dents were still clearly visible around the car and the painting wasn't sparkling enough, at least not to the restorer's satisfaction, so they gave it a thorough clear coat polish. They also took time to patch up the tires and clean the interior. It's almost time for the final reveal, but before then, let's hit pause for a second and talk about the history of this car and why it is so iconic. Designed as a gasoline-powered and modern version of the W121, the 1960 Mercedes-Benz 190B is a four-door sedan that embodies Germany's idea of daily driving luxury from the past. It featured a 1.9-liter engine which allows the car to glide to a top speed of up to 86 miles per hour. But beyond speed, it had a distinctive charm to it that attracted buyers from different parts of the world and across all ages. And that explains why over 28,000 units were sold between 1959 and 1961. Anyway, one of those units found its way to the hands of an owner in Texas, America, who failed to look after it properly. But thankfully, Wyatt and Lance came to the rescue, and after several hours of relentless work, this 1960 Mercedes-Benz 190B is finally ready to be introduced to the world. That's wild. I mean, who would have thought it would come out looking as stunning as it did? Definitely not me. But just when I thought I had seen enough, one of the restorers hopped into the car and took it for a ride. And it was absolute bliss. So what do you think? Which part of this restoration did you enjoy the most? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to enjoy more content like this one.